Good morning. The Defence Secretary has launched a security review after the third unidentified object in as many days was shot down over North America. In a statement, Ben Wallace said the UK and her allies will review what these airspace intrusions mean for our security. This development is another sign of how the global threat picture is changing for the worse. Well, this morning, Transport Minister Richard Holden told Sky News it was possible that spy balloons had already travelled over the UK.
China is a hostile state, and we need to be aware of that and the way it acts and behaves. I think there was an era when China could have gone a different way and perhaps opened up, but it's quite clear at the moment it's not going in that direction. And we've got to be really robust in our dealings with China.
Is it possible that Chinese spy balloons have already been used over the UK?
I mean, it's possible. It's also possible that, and I would think likely that there will be people from the Chinese government trying to act as a hostile state.
Well, 4 objects have been downed over North America this month. On Saturday, the 4th of February, a US F-22 fighter jet shot down a Chinese spy balloon off the South Carolina coast. On Friday, another unidentified high-altitude object, which was the size of a small car, was brought down. On Saturdays, Canada's Prime Minister confirmed another unidentified object over the sparsely populated territory of Yukon in the Canadian northwest. And last night, a US F-16 jet fired a missile and downed another unidentified object over Lake Huron on the US-Canada border. Now, US authorities say the object flew near sensitive military sites and could have been used for spying. Now, the growing concern over NATO airspace has seen suspicion fall on China. Our correspondent in Beijing, Helen Ann Smith, has been attending a news briefing by China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Neither the Americans or the Canadians have directly said yet where those identified objects have come from or exactly what they were. But the insinuation from those nations is pretty clear that they believe it's possible they've come from China. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, no less, has said he thinks it's likely they were part of a fleet of balloons coming from China. So all eyes were on this room today and on what the Chinese would say in response to that. This is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here, and we attended a daily press conference that happens. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson who led the press conference was asked multiple times by multiple journalists whether China would confirm or deny that those 3 unidentified craft that had been shot down over the weekend had anything to do with China. And he didn't confirm or deny that. What he did do was respond with a big dollop of defiance. There was a pretty lengthy speech from him about how the fact that it is America, he says, that is the most aggressively surveilling country in the world, that it is America that other countries need to be worried about. And he offered this as a new piece of detail. He said that since January 2022, America has sent at least 10 spy-type balloons over into China's airspace. There was a lot of follow-up questions about when that happened, where it was, how did China respond at the time, and he didn't answer those questions directly, but it is nonetheless a very, very interesting accusation. The language also moved a little bit in terms of the denunciation that we've heard a lot of in terms of the shooting down of that first balloon, the one that China does claim was its, but says was a civilian craft that was there doing weather monitoring. He said that the shooting down of that balloon was trigger happy, he said, and unnecessary. And there was also some interesting questions about that unidentified craft that China now says is in its airspace, and that the reports yesterday that it was preparing to shoot that down. Again, myself and a number of journalists asked specifically about those plans, and it was a very clear no comment when it came to that. He wasn't drawn at all on any further detail about the craft that is over China. But really, this toing and froing over these unidentified craft is not doing anything to help repair these pretty damaged relations between the US and China. It's amazing to think that just over a week ago, the US Secretary of State was due to visit Beijing. That now feels a very long way off.
Well, I'm glad to say I'm joined now for analysis on this by retired Vice Air Marshal Sean Bell. So much to get into on this, but shall we start by talking about the height of these objects and why that's really key?
Yes, good morning, Leo. Yes, this is the fourth sort of incident in the last week. The first one, which was the Chinese balloon with, as you can just see below it, the payload underneath it. So exactly what it was doing there. This was above 60,000 feet. Why is that important is that that's well clear of any airlines. It's well clear of most military traffic. And therefore, it doesn't pose a risk to anything flying. It's more a question of what was it doing there and how was it doing that? The other instance, though, the one on Saturday, the incident, that was at 40,000 feet, and that's at the top end of where the airlines operate and is hard to the envelope for where military jets operate. And then if you look at the Sunday shoot down around Canada, that was allegedly around 20,000 feet, and that's right in the sweet spot of where all the civilian traffic operate. And if you can just imagine hundreds of people inside an airline, that is, you do not want to be hitting stuff there, and therefore it poses a real flight safety risk. Now, the first one, as I said, because of we don't know the payload exactly here. The other ones are probably just objects, as we know at the moment. But it's worth noting, as Justin Bronx said, there are so many satellites in orbit these days that are looking for track the weather, and it's much easier to track it up there. It's very hard to believe that people would be putting weather tracking capability into a balloon these days.
Indeed, indeed. Let's talk about the technology, Sean, because this is also key, because any technology comes with a big price tag.
It does, and from a military perspective, it's fascinating because actually tracking balloons is quite difficult to do. A conventional radar sends out a ping and needs to bounce off something. So that's why you have stealth aircraft with lots of careful corners, no sharp edges, lots of specific coverings. And they're all designed specifically to avoid radar detection, whereas balloons are really difficult to detect, particularly when they're very high and they're a long way away. So the America almost certainly will have technology to track this sort of stuff. The challenge is they won't always want to tell the world how good their radars are. Right. And of course, as soon as you say you're able to track something that's that big, then your enemy will try to create something that's that big. So there's a lot of tolerance applied. We've heard literally the other day the Americans have dialed up the sensitivity of their radars. You think, yeah, OK. Is that political language that, you know, we can see this stuff, but we now, our patience has run to a limit. In terms of the cost, these aircraft, the F-22s, these are, you know, $200 million aeroplanes. The missile that was used to shoot the last one down, AIM-9X missile, that's about $400,000 of missile. So, and almost certainly the target wasn't worth anything like that. But this is actually more about the politics. There's a clear statement of intent here. This is about political tensions.
On both
sides. And also, it's worth pointing out, actually operating over enemy territory and spying is nothing new. U-2, Gary Powers operating over the Urals was shot down. And that was before the days, really, where we had lots of satellites. But both sides, both China, Russia, America, the Brits, all look using satellite technology and observe over each other's territory. The challenge is these days, it's highly unlikely that you'd need to do that with balloons. So from a military perspective, the bigger worry is actually what you're doing is testing America's defences. How would they operate? How could they shoot down something like this? Because a little balloon is cheap as chips to produce. Therefore, if you put 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000 in, so what the worry from the West will be what the implications of this. But undoubtedly, it's all heightening political tensions at a time when you're never quite sure which party is actually this suits which country to do that.
Indeed, I'm sure we'll be covering this for days, maybe weeks to come. Sean, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. We've just heard from the Prime Minister this morning. Let's have a listen.
The number of incidents we had in the United States with these so-called spy balloons, have we looked into this into the UK? Have you talked to the intelligence military about whether there's a possibility that some of these balloons or Chinese balloons have been in the UK's airspace?
Well, I want people to know that we'll do whatever it takes to keep the country safe. We have something called the Quick Reaction Alert Force, which involves Typhoon planes, which are kept on 24/7 readiness to police our airspace, which is incredibly important. I can't obviously comment in detail on national security matters, but we're in constant touch with our allies. And as I said, we'll do whatever it takes to keep the country safe.
But just specifically, to date, you do not know of any instance of spy balloons being spotted over UK airspace?
As I said, I wouldn't comment in detail on security matters, but people should be reassured that we have all the capabilities in place to keep the country safe, including the Quick Reaction Alert Force, which has Typhoon planes, which can police our skies on 24/7 readiness. But more generally, we're in touch with our allies and we'll make sure that the country is always protected.